Please welcome OXSID.
Yeah! Whew. It was shock, no sound. It's like we're going back to 1930s. All right, how are you? Good. Trojans for the sound. Ah, keren. Trojans, let me hear your voice. That's it. All right. Oxonian, let me hear your voice. Okay, let's do this. When you say Trojans, don't do yeah, say All right? So let's do one more time for Trojans, because this is, Oxonian is going to win, okay? This is very simple, right? All right, so Trojans, let me hear your voice. Bapak-bapak juri, tolong dibantu juga untuk supaya mereka menang. Trojans, let me hear your voice. You guys gonna get killed. Oxonian, let me hear your voice. All right, good. So before we start, let me clear this. All right, I'm not coming from either of both universities. All right, so don't kill me. Kill each other. My name is Arto Subiantoro, and well, actually, I was graduated from San Francisco Academy of Art. It is not in California. And yes, San Francisco is the gay capital city of the world. And we don't have debate in San Francisco. People are just chilling out. We just sit down, sipping our wine, and looking at this beautiful island of Alcatraz. And the only debate that we have in San Francisco, is actually a karaoke competition. Maybe my life will come back someday. On the other guy will say like this, "Hoo hey ha, living la vida loca." That's the only thing we have. So to be in this kind of event and this debate is very exciting for me. As you see, actually, I'm not an MC. I'm a motorcyclist, and I do riding through different places of the island of Indonesia, capturing stories of local brand. We have 40,000 brands each year registered, and this brand has a lot of story and things that we can learn, and also things that we can study and get their wisdom. So the idea of the program is on digital, is actually to go to different cities and see on different brands and learn from them. So today, topic is very important for me. I never been here before, as you guys never been here before to see the debates. So I apologize if there is any things that not according to our process. So again, we're all learning on this debate. So hopefully, we're gonna see this debate with another school. So before we start, I would like to invite this one very good friend of mine, and he also a president of Oxford. He happened to visit me once in San Francisco, so you can imagine like two males visiting each other in the capital city of Gay. That's what, 20 years ago. So everyone already know Oxford is the oldest university in English-speaking country since the 10th century, and USC alumni is the oldest and the largest alumni society in Indonesia with 1,000 plus members today. So I think, yes, I guess we have to invite the president. So please welcome Rio Jovian Haminoto, the Associate, and also Anne Patricia Sultanto from USC. Oh, what a gentleman, he's waiting. All right, so please be my guest.
First or me first?
I guess, ladies first, monkey behind.
Okay, thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Friends, families, adjudicators, and of course my fellow Oxford alumni Indonesia, and from the US Embassy, I said to Mr. Donovan, please, the bridge not going to come, but the US American first. Right? Trojans! Okay, so we, the alumni USC Indonesia, we are honored that Oxford challenged us. We all know, like Arto said, Oxford is the oldest and the most preeminent university in UK and possibly in Europe. UK and Europe right now, because you guys have Brexit, right? But USC, we used to be the University of Spoiled Children. But now we can be said we are the University of Smart Children because Oxford actually challenged us, right? Instead of the Ivy League school, the other Ivy League school, or we can be said, you know, the seniors of Trojans, we can declare ourselves right now the University of Successful Children. Trojans, fight on! So, as you may know, I'm not going to have my welcoming speech where you guys can read, because this is actually made by my fellow president before me, Mr. Holip. Every time I give speech, I said to Holip, why don't you do it, and I will pledge it as my own. Guys, you should know that Neil Armstrong, the first man on the moon, is actually USC alumni. Just for your information. So, with proud, I would like to say that I hope that today's debate would be a good entertaining for all of you, and also good knowledge for those of you who knows about a free trade agreement and maybe can give a fair judgment how we are going to entertain ourselves on the floor. And all of you know that every net proceeds of this event from donators as well as sponsor will go to Palu Donggala. And I have to say thank you to Rio, because This is actually, even though we co-host with Oxford, the idea comes from Oxford alumni. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome here. My first gentleman, I guess.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Well, I have a confession to make that actually USC is our second option. No, the thing is, we sent a letter of challenge to Harvard University. But yes, the thing is, Harvard hasn't answered our invitation. I think I know why. Because they're not Trojans. Fine. And I also have a confession to make. It wasn't until my fourth attempt that I finally made it to Oxford. I keep trying and trying, so I guess I also have the heart of the Trojans. Thank you. So, thank you for Anne and the whole AUSCI for accepting our challenge. Well, it's not a challenge actually, it's an invitation to collaborate. I'm sure that this kind of initiative is necessary for the civil society of Indonesia. Well, enjoy the night and hope that we could connect somehow. Thank you.
That's the challenge we gave.
Right. Tadi di belakang begini, kita nggak usah berantem ya, kita semua baik-baik saja, kita satu keluarga saja. Gitu. Alright, Rio, just make sure, okay, next one, you invite University of Indonesia, alright? They gonna come with bambu runcing. Alright, thank you, Presidents. So next, we would like to hear the opening remarks from Honorable Regis Singh. He is currently the Chief of Trade and Investment of the Embassy of the United States of America Economic Section. Mr. Regis Singh.
Good evening, selamat malam. After this rousing welcome by the presidents, I hate to throw a wet blanket on the festivities, so I'm just going to give some brief remarks, a few minutes. I don't want to stand between you and what I'm sure will be a fantastic debate, but I thought I'd frame for the debaters some ideas about trade as we're currently facing it. So it's an honor to represent the U.S. Embassy tonight, and thanks for the opportunity. I'd also like to thank the two organizations, alumni of University of Southern California in Indonesia, AUSCI, and the University of Oxford Society of Indonesia, UOSI. The dinner and debate are also a reminder that while natural disasters that have occurred in Lombok and Central Sulawesi are no longer in the news every day, AUSCI and UOSI recognize that the needs remain and recovery efforts continue. So I commend you for that. The motion up for debate tonight reads, this House believes free trade agreements undermine state sovereignty. This topic is very timely. It touches on aspects of trade protectionism during a time of flux in emerging markets with a backdrop of volatile currencies and talk of trade wars. International trade is often squarely at the center of the vigorous debates on globalization and inequality. As a Washington Post columnist wrote earlier this year about that quintessential free trader, Davos man, she said, Davos man, that private jet-taking, international trade dealing, easily caricatured master of the universe is nervous. And she concludes, he should be nervous. Clearly, trade is at the center of much political debate around the world. It played a big role in Brexit, as well as the presidential elections in my country in 2016. I guess I should also do a second. It will be at the center of G20 discussions in Argentina today and tomorrow. Trade has been a human activity for millennia. It's defined nations, including Indonesia, whose diversity and tolerance for difference was partly influenced by the spice trade. Trade has also been the cause of conflict, as well as cooperation between nations. Of course, the nature of trade today has changed enormously, even from 70 years ago. Now, trade goes hand in hand with investment. Now, trade agreements often deal with behind-the-border issues as often as they address tariffs. So trade has changed so much in the past 70 years because it has been so successful. Successive multilateral trade rounds under the GATT, from the first Geneva round in 1947 to the Kennedy round and the Tokyo round, and finally to the Uruguay round in 1994, have cut tariffs significantly. In 2016, the average applied US tariff across all products was 1.61%. Similar figures for the 28-nation EU group is 1.6%, not much higher than Japan's at 1.35%. Among other countries, Canada is at 0.85%, China at 3.54%, Mexico 4.36%. Indonesia's is a bit higher, but still in the single digits at 6.9%. So the Uruguay round, of course, gave us that supranational organization that is often a lightning rod for complaints about trade today. Of course, I'm talking about the WTO. But this body was partly created because of the successes I just cited. Many traders would complain that while countries had low tariffs, they often used other, more opaque, behind-the-border measures to keep out imports and competition. In reply, other countries would point out that they had these rules, these behind-the-border rules and regulations, precisely to protect health, safety, and the national security of people living in that country. So I'll conclude with a personal observation. A few years ago, while I was working on the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, or TTIP, we found our EU negotiating partners very much on the defensive about a provision that had been in hundreds of FTAs and BITs, bilateral investment treaties, for years. And that's the Investor State Dispute Settlement Clause, or ISDS, as trade wonks call it. So the first ISDS clause was actually in a 1959 BIT between Germany and Pakistan. The intention was to encourage foreign investment by protecting investors from discrimination and expropriation. But opponents of ISDS saw it as an infringement of the state's right to regulate and protect people and the environment. To put it bluntly, according to this line of argument, ISDS undermined sovereignty. Fast forward 3 years, and the United States is no longer negotiating TTIP, or TPP for that matter. And if anything, the issue of trade continues to raise controversy around the world. So with that, I look forward to the debate tonight and thank the debaters in advance for all the efforts they've made in preparing their persuasive arguments for and against. Thank you.
Mr. Ray Singh. All right, so I guess everyone wants to know how this debate works because this is the first time, and I think the best person who can explain about this is the person who spent time with them for the last 3 weeks, and he don't like to be called coach, he told me that, but he's currently serving as the commercial directors of Shell Upstream Indonesia. He also senior members of the World Energy Council Indonesian National Committee. During his university years, he has actively participated in several European universities debating championship, as well as World Universities Debating Championship. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Mr. Michael Putra.
Good evening, folks. Good evening, Professor Bertro. Can we go to the next slide, please? This is when I was young and hopeful. Yeah, this is better. Right, so I was asked to give an intro and a context setting and a little bit of a description on how the debate is going to go, understanding that not many of us may have been exposed to this before. But I have to say, this is the first time ever that I came to know a charity event, a reunion, that has a debate element in it. So bravo, well done. And it is, I actually really meant it, because I think many of you will agree, never before, at any time in the history, that it is very important that we promote healthy, mature, fact-based debate. So, no, hoax is not a fact. You're entitled to your opinion, but not to your facts. In fact, there's a really nice quote that people attribute to Aristotle that said, "It is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it." Now, ladies and gentlemen, the debaters that you will see perform tonight, some of them actually do not believe what they are debating in. They actually believe on the other side of the aisle, but they have to debate for the motion or against the motion as per defined. But that's exactly what we need more of today. We need people to be able to see deliberately the other side. We need people to see deliberately what are the facts on the other side. Emotionless, but with facts. Now, with Professor Broto here amongst us, I would like to also remind us this is not just a matter of an educated mind or people with education that I would assume most of us here are, but it is a very important civic duty as well. I don't like to get too mushy, but again, Professor Broto has been indicating us one of the objectives of the country, of the nation, is untuk mencerdaskan kehidupan bangsa. I think many of you I cannot even translate it. It won't do any justice, right? It has an element of intelligence and an element of enlightenment. It has an element of wisdom. And I think things like this is certainly contributing to it. So I do applaud the organizer and the team that has been doing it. On the topic at hand, I think Reggie has done a lot of a little bit subjective briefing. But we will get the balanced view later on during the debate. But also, one of Indonesia's renowned economists, Bung Hatta, whom I shared an alma mater with. I came from Erasmus Rotterdam, so I'm also neutral ground like you. Let them kill each other, right? Don't kill us. And if you read his writings, this very notion, free trade, international investments, sovereignty, have always been at the core of his struggle. Yeah, he talks about socio-economic democracy, he talks about cooperation as the great pillar of the economy, but he also explicitly accepts and welcomes foreign investment. And I quote, because they create employments. So, as long as civilizations exist, this debate has been ongoing and it will continue to go. The world is different though than 1945. At the time, the world GDP was just 4 trillion. Now it's over 80 trillion. So if the benefits is there, it has been multiplied. But if the problem is there, it has also been multiplied. Now, quickly on the debating format. It is actually called British Parliamentary Debate. So no, Reggie, you will not get filibuster tonight. It's actually timed. And it is being adopted from the British parliamentary style, where there's two sides of the house, and they do their arguments and then counter arguments, and that's what the adjudicators will be looking at, is the quality of the arguments, the style in which it has been presented, and the mastery of the content. So all of this in balance will define who the adjudicators think will be the winning team. However, that's the electoral college. But you guys are the popular vote to choose for the best speaker. And I think you have that small blank check in front of you. So this is where people power come to play. So, for our debaters, I also have to make one last remark. I think I don't know most of them before this event, but this is not just talk for our debaters. Huh? If you know who they are, I think they are actors and leaders in the economic forum. So they are living this day by day, and I think wish them all the best, and I hope you enjoy tonight. Thank you.
So let me remind you, each team will have 4 speakers. 4 speakers. Each speaker will get 8 minutes speech. 8 minutes speech. So I will remind the speakers 1 minute prior to the end of the speech, and also 15 seconds prior to the speech. Alright? So if they keep talking, we're just gonna drag them down. So their speech can be interrupted only by their opponent. Nah, ini bocorannya di belakang, jangan dihitung ya, jangan harus ya. Oke. So, but we hope we can see that tonight. So the interruption should be short with maximum of 30 seconds with intention to give clarification statement or to ask question to speaker. The debate will open by the Prime Minister from the proposition bench, and then they will take turn on pro and 1 con at the time. We have chosen 3, this is difficult, adjudicators. Yeah, that's not American, that's British. So I'm learning on that, okay? To assess the debate, their mission is to choose 1 best team who are the most convincing and the most articulated. The audience will get the chance to select 1 best speaker or your most favorite speaker. You can cast your vote in the ballot inside your booklet. Tadi udah terima bookletnya. And the committee will take your votes after the debates end. Jadi ada 8 gambar, nanti tinggal dipilih 1. During the debate, audience are expected to keep decorum or be quiet as to respect the speakers. You are allowed to clap or give support only before and after the debaters speak. So I guess it's all clear? Now the motion for tonight is this House believes that free trade agreements undermine state sovereignty. Speaking as the proposition is, there's supposed to be a sound coming in, music coming in from the top. And the music is the music to kill each other. It is from the Alumni University of Southern California, Indonesia. Let me hear your voice. And speaking as the opposition is team from the University of Oxford Society of Indonesia. Let me hear your voice. All right. They're about really to kill each other tonight. And let me introduce to you the proposition speakers. This is coming from the Trojans. He is the graduate of the class of 94 in entrepreneurship. Let me introduce to you the Prime Minister, Holid Sukawan. And the Deputy of Prime Ministers is the economic graduate from the class of 94 and the class of 2000 as the finest background. Please welcome Andrew Subowo. And our president, he is a member government and majoring in chemical engineering with minor in business from the class of 92 and Sutanto. And coming from the class of 89 from industrial engineering, the government whip Raju Wanusami. And now for the opposition speakers, the Oxonians. The 2015 2015 Postgrad Strategy and Innovation from St. Business School, the Leader of Opposition, Raj Kadam. The 2015 Grad Magistrate Juris Faculty of Law, and he is the first Indonesian to graduate and obtain this degree. Please welcome Deputy Leaders Opposition, Rifki Wicaksono. And coming from St. Hugh's College, who's still studying an MSc in St. Business School, BSc in Politics. I can even read. Please welcome Billy Mam Brasa. And of course, the opposition whip. Please welcome the president himself, Rio Sofian Haminoto. And the educators, Dr. Henry Satriago. He is now the Chief Executive Officer of General Electric Indonesia. Mr. Constant Ponggawa. He is the managing partner and one of the founding members of Hanafiya Ponggawa and Partners Law Firm. And Professor Dr. Subrata. He was a minister of cooperative from 1973 from 1978, ministers of mines and energy from 1978 to 1988, and became the Secretary General of OPEC from 1988 to 1994. He currently served as chairman of the Indonesia Institute of Energy Economics and chairman of Bimasina Mines and Energy Society. Please welcome all these three adjudicators. And now, let the debate begin. Yes, you can hug each other actually, San Francisco style, of course. So I'll be stand over here and I will remind each one of you.
Adjudicators, representatives from the U.S. Embassy, cautious timekeeper, members of the opposite team, and our honored audience. Before I put forward my case today, it is my honor to introduce your guest this evening. Andrew Subowo, a financial wizard who is rumored to earn better returns than Mr. Buffett. Ana Patricia Sutanto, President of Alumni USC Indonesia, and our resident Tiger Mom, Tiger Leader, and Tiger Businesswoman. And Raju Munusami, the only USC alumni I know that has a master's degree from both USC and from Harvard. And I think Raju values his USC pedigree more, proven by his being here tonight. Honored adjudicators and ladies and gentlemen, these are your guests, and please welcome them to this house. I would like to define today's motion. This house believes that free trade agreements undermine state sovereignty. Today, I, as the Prime Minister, will be the first speaker of the LDCs, the less developed countries, and will present my argument. My buddy, Karen Campbell, the Trade Commissioner of New Zealand, said that FTAs helps cut down bureaucracy and clarify processes. Let's break down the words FTA, which starts with F, for free, which is defined as removal of tariffs and barriers. Is that good? Before we determine the answer, let's discuss the third alphabet in FTA, A, which stands for agreement. Now this is the elephant in the room, because if nations are in agreement, including all of us in this house, there is no need for tonight's debate, and we can move on to the real entertainment of the evening. The other elephant standing would of course be sovereignty. Bahasa Indonesianya kedaulatan. Sovereignty is defined as a nation's ability and flexibility to issue and adjust policies that serves her people and national interests best. You mess with the nation's sovereignty and you are waking up an elephant, eagle, chicken, dragon, depending on which country you are messing with. We believe that FTAs undermine a nation's sovereignty, particularly the less developed countries. Less developed countries is defined as those with low per capita real income, high population growth vis-a-vis their size, with relatively high rates of unemployment, dependence on primary sector and primary commodities. New Zealand's Trade Officer Campbell, whose country exports about 8 times more to Myanmar than it imports from them, told the Myanmar Times, through FTA, respective governments have a forum through which to manage trade relationships, including establishing clear processes and resolving impediments. This benefits exporters and importers in both countries by reducing red tape and improving certainty around processes. Now, I want to highlight 2 key words. FTA helps in establishing clear processes and resolving impediments. Establishing clear processes by what means? And resolving impediments for whom? A late 2016 Washington Post article says, multinationals have gained more power to challenge the laws of developing countries thanks to a recent surge in ISDS, which stands for Investor-State Dispute Settlement, which Mr. Singh mentioned. Companies can sue countries through independent arbitration courts and not through the host country's court system. What I'm saying is, corporations from developed countries have leveraged their dollars and lobbies to set up all kinds of rules, some of which are embedded in these so-called free trade agreements. They resolve impediments by suing their own trading partner nation and then insisting on the resolution in an independent arbitration court in lieu of their trading partner's in-country court system. Doesn't this sound like an affront to a nation's sovereignty? We only need to look at history, for example, of corporations playing the bully. In 1880s, the Bombay Burma Trading Company, A corporation, misled the Burmese government about how much teak it was extracting and underpaying their employees. When sanctioned by the Burmese government 130 years ago, the British suggested arbitration. It was the birth of the early form of ISDS. Yes, that same ISDS, which is now part of many FTAs. Following the Bombay Burma Trading Company incident and the messy arbitration, Burma got entangled with the British government and eventually became a British colony in late 1880s. And tonight, 130 years later, we are arguing about how FTAs undermine a state's sovereignty. I'm a fake prime minister, but I'm sure being colonized is a very real worst-case scenario for a country's sovereignty. How can a company, under the guise of FTAs, sue developing countries like us, their trading partner, sue us while claiming they are protecting our own interests through the free trade agreement? Who is the free trade agreement beneficial for? Speaking about free and trade, let us use the Internet of Things as an analogy. There is a new hot commodity in town. It is called data. Data is a new oil. Though we want internet in less developing countries to keep on growing, we are quite worried about the control that developed countries have on this new oil. Perhaps in some ways, we want to be like China, who have their own Tencent, WeChat, Baidu, to counter the likes of Google, Facebook, Twitter, and the US social media law. Can FTAs guarantee that our society's data, which is being inputted through Google and Facebook on a daily basis, be treated fairly? We do not need another Cambridge Analytica scandal in our midst just because our oil, our data, is being traded and abused by these companies. Until such time, FTAs can guarantee the protection of internet data traffic from being abused by foreign corporations, FTAs might prove useless in the Internet of Things and in most things. The World Wide Web is borderless and thus should, in theory, be the perfect proving ground of free trade, agreements or no agreements. China is perhaps an extreme example of control over its own internet and data. They have their Baidu, WeChat, and Tencent. Using the word Tencent as an analogy, can FTAs ensure that the Tencent is divided 5 cents each? 5 cents to the less developed country, and 5 cents to the corporation from the developed country. If the answer is cannot, why bother with FTAs? Again, I'm not saying that we shall follow in China's footsteps in terms of protecting our internet traffic, but we must protect our own data for our people, for our land first. Free trade promises more riches for everyone.
15 seconds.
In reality, the benefit of having a borderless and bigger pie from joining a free trade agreement is not shared equally, both within countries and across countries. As it stands now, FTA undermines a nation's sovereignty.
Thank you very much.
Less developed countries.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a round of applause, Mr. Haminoto of USC. And now for the Speaker of Opposition, the Leader of Opposition, please welcome Raj Khanna. The time will start as you speak.
The Honorable Prime Minister and members of your cabinet and my fellow opposition MPs. I guess one of the things I wanted to take away from what the Prime Minister was saying was that can FTAs guarantee growth for local companies, local countries, local communities? I'll prove to you it will. Perhaps let me start by saying free trade agreement by definition is not actually free. Far from it. FTA is not a euphemism for giving up one's sovereignty, however hard one may try to fashion it such from the honorable government bench. FTAs does involve barriers, involves tariffs, and most definitely involves protection of local industries. And as often is the case, these agreements can take generations to negotiate and agree. Quite rightly so. Thus, the notion FTAs undermine sovereignty is false. Perhaps a little bit of history is warranted. Post the Second World War, 23 nations came together to set the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, popularly known as GATT, G-A-T-T. GATT took effect on 1st of January 1948. Purpose of GATT, I quote, substantial reduction of tariffs and other trade barriers and the elimination of preferences on a reciprocal and mutually advantageous basis, end quote. I repeat the end, on a reciprocal and mutually advantageous basis. Thus, free trade was never about losing one's sovereignty. Indonesia was one of the first ASEAN countries to join GATT in 1950. Nearly 50 years later, on the 1st January 1995, the World Trade Organization was established to succeed GATT, this time involving 123 nations. Indonesia was a founding member of WTO, and it took another 6 years for China before it was allowed to join WTO. So let's look at China, and we'll come back to it why it took 6 years. In the context of foreign trade. Following the Second World War, China literally went into a self-imposed alienation from the rest of the world. Chairman Mao and his gang of revolutionaries effectively shut down the entire economy to foreign investors as well as foreign tourists, and their autocratic rule resulted in mass extermination, famine, repression, you name it. 3 years following Chairman Mao's death, China, then under Deng Xiaoping, adopted the policy of allowing foreign trade. Japan was one of the first countries that responded to this open door policy. According to Professor Tsukasa Takamine, who studied Japan's official development assistance program to China, found that over a 30-year period, from 1979 to 2008, Japan had provided official development assistance facilities to the tune of 45 billion US dollars in low interest loans and grants to China, becoming the biggest foreign lender and by virtue of that, foreign investor in China. During the same period, Japan trained over 30,000 technocrats and bureaucrats and students from China in Japan on everything about running the services that's required in the country, from running infrastructure to running banks, etc. So the logical question is, did Japan do this out of goodness of its heart? Well, yes and no. Japan believed that a prosperous neighbor was a peaceful neighbor, thus ensuring regional peace. But more importantly, Japan was bursting at the seams in its manufacturing industries in Japan. The wages locally in Japan were high, and the goods produced within Japan were not competitive in the international market. So China was a logical answer to move Japan's labor-intensive factories to. Now, when you set up a factory in a foreign country that doesn't have a basic infrastructure, that's not necessarily a good thing. You need ports, you need airports, you need railway, you need highways. So this $45 billion that Japan invested in China went to building this infrastructure. Now, if FTA is so bad, Japan could not have taken away those infrastructure. The infrastructure remained. But there are those in Japan who believe, in fact, I think Professor Takamine was in fact, condemned in some media as pointing out the fact that Japan cannibalized its own economy at to the benefit of China, that China went from basically a basket case economy to the second largest economy in the world. Now my question to you, my fellow audience and Oxonians and USC graduates and guests, did China become a colony of Japan? Did Japanese investment create hordes of Japanese occupying swaths of land in China? Did all of Chinese now only converse in Japanese? Did China lose its sovereignty? No, not at all. Free trade did not undermine state sovereignty. I mentioned WTO formation in '95. As some of you know, China was not allowed to join
1 minute.
until 21. And one of the reasons was because the whole world wanted China to open up some components of its trade, to improve its services, to be transparent, to protect the rights of private sector, to protect the rights of intellectual property. Now these are benefits of an FTA that caused China to open up better, to enable the trade in the best way possible. Now let's bring it back to Indonesia. Now, some of you may remember in 1995, or some of you may not, some of you are very young, Singapore, Malaysia, and Indonesia introduced a concept called growth triangle. Within this growth triangle, the orchids that are so popular in Singapore were produced in Batam,
2,
and Johor,
Thank you very
and
much.
exported to Japan, and the net benefit was $9 billion.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Raj Khanna of Oxford. And from second speaker's proposition, please welcome Mr. Andrew Subowo of USC.
Good evening,
ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Speaker and leaders of the oppositions. I'd like to start by answering your questions with regards to China and the colonizations of Japan. You didn't mention about the fight the Chinese government struggled to keep it away from being colonized from Japan. So to say that did China become a colony of Japan, the answer is no, because Japan actually fought, China struggled and fought for that. Now, we represent the less developed countries. We do recognize the good intentions and the noble thinking of a free trade, where we live in a world where we can buy more efficient, cheaper products from anywhere in the world. We do believe in the good intention of WTO in regulating from their head office in Geneva to make sure that the free trade agreement will be regulated and managed that is both mutually beneficial for both rich and poor countries of its members. And we understand that the need post-World War II, where like Marshall plans, the money from the more heavier, richer capital flew to help develop the infrastructure of less developed countries at that time. But China at that time, post-World War II, is the less developed countries that we represent today. Now let me ask you this question. What happens if you don't have anything to offer? What if you're a country with no globally competitive products or services that you can sell to other free trade member countries? And why? Because you're not given a chance to compete. What happens if you don't have enough income to buy better products from other member countries? What if your country has simply nothing to offer? Does the free trade agreement facilitate the poorer countries or less developed countries that we represent to catch up with more developed countries? Simply like what the US did with the Marshall Plan for Germany post-World War II. Because after all, if you don't have anything to buy or to sell, and perhaps you shouldn't go to the marketplace. Now I understand that the notion you would argue that a country like that, the less developed country should not produce everything by yourself. Yes. But countries did not strut at the same time. Nations developed their industries not at the same period. Some more of the developed countries have developed their industries centuries ahead of less developed countries. A good financial system is the backbone, for example, for economic growth in a country. The Bank of England, for example, was created hundreds of years before many of the central banks of less developed countries. Now, when we follow the comparative advantages of the free trade agreement, does that mean less developed countries should adapt and use the financial system based from more developed countries, such as UK? Certainly some infrastructure, such as financial system, judicial systems, and strategic industries are so critical to a country's survival that they simply cannot be outsourced nor heavily influenced by other nations. The point I'm trying to make is, weaker and less developed countries should only enter the free trade agreement if only you can help them as tools or guidance to catch up with more developed countries. Countries must first look inwards into their internal capacities and ask, what have we got to offer? What do we have that can be comparative advantage to trade in the marketplace? And unless less developed countries are given a chance to develop and build their internal capacity, then these countries would never be able to catch up with other developed nations. Therefore, the question is, can the FTA, or Free Trade Agreement, be the tools or guidelines and to help these younger countries, less developed countries, to be able to participate in the free trade in the future? We understand that less developed countries should let more advanced countries produce certain strategic industries and just instead of developing themselves. That's fair. But as long as the relationship remains harmonious, Cuba has had an economic embargo for decades, simply because their sovereign idealism is not aligned with the more powerful nations. It is our view that given the world-growing sentiments towards nationalism, that we cannot blindly rely on more developed neighboring countries, especially on the nation's strategic programs and strategic resources and strategic industries. Like my Prime Minister said, we now live in the era of technology, the Internet of Things, Instagram. With all due respect to the judges, so our great-grandfather will, if we say, you mention about Bluetooth, they'll say, what did you do? So, in this digital era, we are facing a vast amount of information. And the question is, where does the sovereign nation lies when it comes to accessing, managing, and harnessing this vast information from its own population? The ability and the era digital needs depends on the knowledge and the skill level of its young people. Oxford was created hundreds of years before many of the best universities in the less developed countries. Does that mean that we have to rely our information in digital era and internet information for students from the more advanced countries and more advanced universities? So we outsource the management of our own population database that's now collected on the internet. I agree that the argument of free trade allows you to buy cheaper imported products from other countries. But perhaps it is not what less developed country needs to do. It is an easier way.
1 minute.
But perhaps less developed countries must struggle and develop their own industrial capacity, strategic capacity, in order to survive the next generation. If not, what is at stake? The stake is you are creating a generation with nothing to offer in the free trade world. And then you're creating a population that's simply become a consumer base, working for globally powerful corporations. So that is at stake for less developed countries. If we simply just enter a free trade agreement blindly, without being selective and looking inwards into what
15 seconds.
Capacity-wise. With that, Speaker, I end my remarks and leave you with the thought that we do need to be selective.
3, 2,
Thank you very much.
1. Haminoto, Deputy Prime Minister.